111 years ago on this day, the 15th of April, the RMS Titanic sank in one of the most infamous disasters of the 20th century. Around 1,500 people died as the ocean liner, once dubbed unsinkable, plunged to the bottom of the icy North Atlantic Ocean. And inevitably, the Titanic has been a matter of public interest ever since it sank. But with the ship's wreckage slowly decaying deep at the bottom of the ocean, you might think that it's difficult to get up close and personal with this iconic piece of maritime heritage. But that's not the case, as in the United Kingdom, the Titanic's home country, there are a select few towns and cities which share a deep connection with the unsinkable vessel, from where it was built to where it first set sail, and the hometowns of some of the people who were on board during its fateful maiden voyage. It's these places then that are well worth visiting if you want to learn more about the story of the RMS Titanic. And so in this video, we're going to take a look at the 3 British cities you must visit to uncover the truth about one of the world's most infamous maritime stories. Number 1. Belfast. There's nowhere in the UK quite as rich in Titanic heritage as the Northern Irish capital of Belfast, home to the iconic shipyards where the groundbreaking vessel was constructed over the course of 3 years. Belfast is so closely linked with the Titanic, in fact, that an entire area of the city has been named for the ship. Belfast's so-called Titanic Quarter, featuring an array of recently developed housing estates, hotels, shopping parades, as well as refurbished historic docks, and the centrepiece Titanic Belfast, a spectacular modern museum that opened in 2012 on the 100th anniversary of the ship's sinking. Titanic Belfast is home to an array of captivating exhibitions that detail the story of the ship, as well as the city's connections to it. But it's the design of the museum itself which is probably most fascinating, constructed in a striking shape that was built to the exact same size as the bow of the Titanic itself, making it the best way to truly experience the ocean liner's immense size for yourself. But this modern museum is far from the only place where you can get up close and personal with the Titanic, because a short walk further along the shore of Belfast Lough, you can pass by the iconic yellow cranes known as Samson and Goliath, which belong to the storied Harland and Wolff shipyard, the place where the Titanic was built. The historic shipyard, parts of which have been made open to the public, is home to a wealth of Titanic heritage, most notably the pump house where the Titanic was due to be maintained, and the dry dock in which the ship was first constructed, which itself had to be specifically built for the Titanic, a ship bigger than any other at the time it was due to set sail in 1912. At the turn of the 20th century, Belfast's shipbuilding industry was lauded as one of the greatest in the world, and that's why the city was selected for the construction not just of the Titanic, but other great ocean liners of the day, including the RMS Olympic and the HMHS Britannic, all of which belonged to the prestigious shipping company White Star Line, which was originally founded in... Number 2. Liverpool. The home city of White Star Line, the company which operated the Titanic on its one and only voyage, Liverpool is also home to a vast array of landmarks that commemorate its connections with this world-famous ocean liner. In the 19th century, the port city of Liverpool developed as one of the main destinations for transatlantic ships connecting Britain with the United States and Canada, and White Star Line was one of a number of shipping companies that decided to set up shop there. With White Star Line headquartered in Liverpool, this was the place of the Titanic's registration, and so you'll find a number of buildings around the city linked to the administration of the ship, the most famous being the eye-catching Albion House, set back just a few yards from the busy waterfront of the River Mersey at Pier Head. Albion House, built in the late 19th century, served as the headquarters of White Star Line until 1934, therefore including the time of the Titanic. And today it's been converted into a luxurious hotel, with its rooms inspired by the splendour of the Titanic itself, making this one of the best places in the world to imagine what it would have been like to be on board the ship. But there's much more to Liverpool's links with the Titanic than that. A short walk further along the River Mersey from Albion House, you'll find the Titanic Memorial, a grand monument that pays tribute to the 244 people from Liverpool who died in the sinking of the Titanic. Beside Liverpool's famous Albert Dock, meanwhile, you'll also find the city's excellent Maritime Museum, which features a permanent exhibition exploring the untold story of Liverpool and the Titanic's close connections. There's plenty more to see if you keep a keen lookout on a trip to Liverpool, from the famous Cunard building in the middle of the city's Three Graces, home to White Star Line's longtime business rivals, and even a pub named the White Star, which is also often touted as the place where the Beatles played their very first gig in Liverpool. But while Liverpool was for a long time a major port for those travelling across the Atlantic, the Titanic didn't actually depart from here, but rather from Number 3. Southampton. It was from Southampton that the RMS Titanic set off on its fateful voyage, beginning what was supposed to be a roughly week-long journey across the Atlantic to New York City, with 2 stops at the northern French town of Cherbourg and the Irish town of Queenstown, now known as Cov. Now, the reason that Southampton was chosen as the Titanic's departure point instead of its home city in Liverpool was down to simple geography. This south coast port being located much closer to London and France, allowing White Star Line to take on passengers from the British capital as well as continental Europe. The Titanic departed Southampton filled with passengers on the 10th of April 1912, infamously sinking just 5 days later in the middle of the Atlantic. And so it's in this city where you can visit many of the places where the passengers who lost their lives on board the Titanic spent their final moments on dry land. One notable spot in Southampton's captivating Old Town is the Grapes pub, opened in the early 19th century, and the place which was regularly frequented by members of the ship's crew before its departure. However, the Grapes is probably most famous because it may have inadvertently saved the lives of the Slade brothers, 3 local men who decided to pop in for a few last drinks on dry land before their journey across the Atlantic. But the brothers only left the pub with 10 minutes to go before the Titanic's departure, and after being held up on their walk down towards the dock by a train, they were refused entry by the ship's captain for being late, left likely devastated by the dock, unaware that they'd likely been given an incredibly fortunate lifeline. While the Slade brothers made a lucky escape, 549 Southampton residents died in the sinking of the Titanic, the most from any one British city. And so around Southampton today you'll find a wealth of memorials paying tribute to the locals who were lost in the disaster, from the Engineers Memorial in East Park to the Musicians Memorial just across the road, which commemorates the famous group of musicians who played their instruments on the ship's deck as it began to sink. There's plenty more Titanic heritage elsewhere in Southampton, with the city home to its own exhibition on the famed ocean liner at the Sea City Museum. Well worth a visit if you're in Southampton. Now, Belfast, Liverpool and Southampton are the British cities with the richest amount of Titanic heritage. But if you're particularly interested in this famous historical event, you could add to your trip by visiting one of the many towns and even villages which have their own part in the Titanic story. Hanley in Stoke-on-Trent is the hometown of the captain of the Titanic, one Edward John Smith, who famously went down with the ship after it hit the iceberg, while Bolton in Greater Manchester was coincidentally the birthplace of the 2 captains of the nearest ships to the Titanic when it sank, Stanley Lord and Sir Arthur Rostron, who were called to rescue those who'd made it off the rapidly submerging Titanic. There's also Plymouth on England's south coast, which was intended to be one of the Titanic's stops on its eastbound journey back across the Atlantic from New York to Southampton, and also the port where many survivors of the disaster first returned to England 2 weeks after being saved from the middle of the ocean. Plenty more smaller towns also hold interesting connections to the Titanic, from the Cumbrian coastal town of Maryport, the hometown of Thomas Henry Ismay, founder of White Star Line, to the Surrey market town of Godalming, the hometown of one Jack Phillips, the senior radio operator on board the Titanic, who crucially failed to respond to warnings of ice from passing ships, a major cause for the eventual sinking of the ship when it hit this iceberg in the middle of the night. As the ship was going down, however, Phillips worked furiously to call for help, likely saving many lives in the process, although he did perish in the sinking, and there's a memorial in Godalming's delightful riverside park dedicated to him. So, while you can certainly sit back for 3 hours and watch the movie, there's a whole lot more to learn about the Titanic. And there's no better way to do that than getting out and about and exploring its heritage for yourself. Whether that be by taking a trip to the city of its construction, its registration, or its departure, or simply seeking out an often unsung piece of Titanic heritage near you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found it an interesting watch, and I hope you have a wonderful trip visiting any one of these riveting Titanic-themed destinations in future.